want to talk about prayer. Now, first of all, the word prayer refers specifically to the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, that silent portion that you say, standing with the legs together, facing the next holiest place. The vast majority of the contents of the prayer book are not prayer. I know that's difficult and funny. That's the way it is. In fact, in Hebrew, it's not a prayer book at all. It's a sidur. And sidur means organizer or something. Seder is order. And in it, you have the silent prayer, which is strictly speaking prayer. And then you have other things like saying the Shema, which is not prayer, and saying the morning blessings, which is not prayer, and studying the Mishnah, which is not prayer. Prayer is just that section, silent. Now that section breaks up into three pieces. It starts with praise of God. In the middle, you have petition, asking God for things. And at the end, you have an expression of gratitude. Okay, there's something after that, and it's a little complicated, like everything else, but that's the three, basically. Praise, petition, and gratitude. In the weekday prayers, the petition section is by far the largest of the three. And in fact, the purpose of coming before God in prayer is to make petitions. That's what's going on. Praise is there because you don't just barge in and say, hey, give me X. You express what you can understand of your relationship to God and the purpose that He wants you to live up to. And of course, you want to express gratitude, but the reason you're going there is to make petitions. So the first thing that we have to understand is, what does it mean to ask God for something? Yeah.
So I say, why does the praise come first? Are we like, what's the deal with that? It almost seems like you're buttering up God before asking Him for something.
Okay, since you asked, let's talk about it a little bit. What's the idea of praising God? Why should it come first? Are you buttering up God, and so on and so on? The Talmud has a very, how shall I say, derogatory, pessimistic remark about our praise. You know what it's like when human beings praise God? It's like singing the praises of someone and writing praises of someone about his vast hoards of silver, when in fact what he possesses is gold. Which means that the praise is dead wrong. It's dead wrong. To say that he has silver is wrong, he has gold. And what he has is much more valuable than the praise that you're giving. Nothing a human being could say about God would be praise for him. When he hears us praising, it's sort of like when your 6-year-old comes home from first grade and says, Daddy, look at the picture I made for you. Finger paints, masses of color on a piece of paper. And you say, oh, gee, that's wonderful. What is it? And the child says, Daddy, don't you see the sky and the sun and the ships and the rain? And don't you see? Oh yes, sky, sun. We'll put it up on the refrigerator. We'll send a digital photograph to the grandparents. You're not going to call an art dealer and see how much you can get for it, right? What you're touched by is the fact that the child made it for you, and that's really touching, and it's really something that you prize. But the picture isn't worth much. Same thing's true with our praise of God. So the reason we praise God is for our sake, not for His sake. Praising God is a little bit like getting yourself into a state of mind, reminding yourself of certain facts that you have to take into account when you come before Him and petition Him. The whole purpose is preparation for the petition. I said this in 20 words before, but before you ask, you should be in a state of consciousness. Who am I? Who am I asking? How are we related? What is the nature of our history? And what are we progressing towards? So that the request can be an intelligent request. For example, there's a gigantic difference between, on the one hand, asking for charity, and on the other hand, asking for a raise in salary for a job that you've been working at for 15 years. In both cases, you're asking for money, but the context makes the request an entirely different request, and your presentation will be an entirely different presentation. So in order for the request to be made in an intelligent, sensitive fashion, there's an introduction of calling to mind and focusing on elements of the relationship which then make the request the kind of request that it ought to be. There's certainly nothing to do with him, nothing for him. Okay, now when it comes to requesting from God, there is a famous problem with the idea, which is expressed clearly in the Sefer Ikorim. The problem arises in two ways: a very simplistic way, and then a more sophisticated way. And that will be our point of entry into understanding how prayer works. The simple way to put the problem is this. So I'm going to ask God for X. Well, asking for something is a way of getting it. The reason for asking is you think that by asking you might get it. Of course, it's not guaranteed. Very little in life is guaranteed. But the purpose of it is to get it. You have to believe that your asking could have some impact on the outcome. You have to believe there are circumstances in which God will say, well, shall I give him X or not? Let's see. Is he asking or not asking? Okay, I'll give it to him. Not asking? No, I'm not going to give it to him. Such circumstances have to be possible. If they were impossible, if it were impossible for my asking to have any effect whatsoever on the outcome, then it would be nonsensical to ask. It would be absurd. And the Torah never commands something which is nonsensical or absurd. Never. There's always some reason why it should be done, or at least we have no thought that it doesn't have a reason. We might not know what the reason is, but never is there a commitment. It's nonsensical, it's absurd, just jump through the hoops. Why? Because I told you. There's no significance whatsoever. There is no such thing. So I've got to believe that it's at least possible that God will take into account my prayer when he's deciding what to give me. Now, why should I do that? Why should I think it's relevant? And the Sefer Ikorim starts with a very sharp, precise difficulty with this idea. Then he says, God is just. God is just. That means he'll give a person what he deserves. So, I'm asking for X. God will analyze the situation as follows. Does Gottlieb deserve X? If he deserves X, then I'll give it to him because I'm just, even if Gottlieb doesn't ask. If he's earned it, if he deserves it, then God will give it to me, even if I don't ask. And on the other hand, if I haven't earned it, if I don't deserve it, that God, being just, won't give it to me, even if I do ask. So then asking can't make any difference. Asking can't make any difference. And if that's the case, asking would be absurd and would be absolutely unacceptable. Now that's a simplistic way of putting the problem. I say it's a... Want to say something?
Can you ask for something that you don't deserve and it be given to you just for it to be taken away?
Well, again, I started with a very simple way of putting the problem. The simplicity in it is the assumption that God does everything just for justice, just for the sake of justice. The more sophisticated way has to take into account that God has more calculations than just justice. You're introducing one. You're introducing an extra one, an extra possible purpose. So I'm coming to that now. The reason the first pass was simplistic is because it pretends that everything God does is only for one purpose, and that is justice. Okay, that's very simplistic. God may have many things to take into account. In particular, what I get has an effect on my wife, my children, and my general community, and on my activities for the sake of other people, and has all sorts of long-term effects. So thinking that God acts only out of justice is probably too simplistic. But if you stretch your mind a little bit and think of the effect on my children, or the effect on my teaching, or the effect on people who are looking at me as an example, and so forth and so on, it's certainly not obvious why my asking should be one of the factors. Why should my asking be a factor? So we're still left, at least without any positive understanding of why the asking could be a factor that God will take into account. And so far, that means we don't understand why the asking is reasonable. That's not the same as thinking it's unreasonable, but it would be nice to understand why it is reasonable. Now, the way to answer this question is to go into more depth about asking. There are different ways to ask, sort of what I said before to you. There are different ways to ask, different contexts in which you ask, different purposes of asking, and each one will have its own explanation of why God would be interested in your asking under those conditions. And then this will spill over into connections to a number of other sources vis-a-vis the idea of prayer. Let's start at the very bottom. Dear God, give me a 2014 Porsche because I like nice cars. And leather seats and quadraphonic sound and GPS and stereo sound system, so because I can listen to Beethoven that way, and and climate control, the works. Please give it to me, God, because I like and I enjoy nice cars. A totally selfish request. Is there any spiritual element in a request like that? Anything which God could say, well, it has Q, and because it has Q, maybe I'd like to reinforce it. A totally selfish request. I think the answer is yes. Because at least I acknowledge that God is the source of it when it comes. I'm asking Him. That means I'm acknowledging that He's the one in control of what happens. There are a lot of people who want 2014 Porsches and they don't ask God. They just cut God out of the picture altogether. Now, I think we can imagine God saying this. Okay, He's very low. He's very low. In spiritual terms, He's very undeveloped. But He does recognize my existence. He does recognize that I'm running the show. That's worth something. And so from time to time, I'd like to reinforce that when He asks. I'll give Him what He's asking for because I'll reinforce His asking, because in His asking, He recognizes that I exist and that I'm running the show. And that's something worth reinforcing. So there's an example of how it is that in the request, the way the request is made, what it means in the psychology of the person, you can find an element which God might want to reinforce, and therefore the person could say, yes, there are circumstances under which my asking could make the difference. Okay? But of course, that's very low. That's very low. Step up, it's a considerable step up, but I think people can work for it, and I think it can be achieved, is where what you ask for is only means by which to serve Him. We have a long list of petitions in the middle section of Shemona Esrei. The first 6 are personal and communal and local. And by the way, you are encouraged to add your own individual requests under those categories. The category means that you're praying on behalf of the Jewish people. But you also can insert yourself under it and say, I'm in particular need X, Y, Z. That's perfectly appropriate. You have to imagine a guardian angel observing your prayer, and at any point, you say, and please God, give me Q. The guardian is stopping you and say, why? What do you want Q for? And you should have a reason ready where you could say, I want Q because if I have Q, I'll be able to serve you better in this way. That's why I'm asking for it. Imagine that all of your requests are of that type. Now let's ask the same question over again. What interest would God have in responding positively to your request, at least on occasion, so as to reinforce your asking? I think He has at least 2 interests. Number 1, presenting myself as a servant of God, presenting myself as one who has, well, the sum total of all my projects is only to serve God, is a consciousness that God wants to reinforce. That is, for a human being, a very substantial, I would say, very noble spiritual identity, and God wants to reinforce that. So from time to time, God will say, look, He is asking me as my servant. I want to reinforce that consciousness of His, that He's my servant, by answering Him positively. Also, if you ask God for something and you ask Him for it as a means to serve Him, when you get it, you're preparing yourself to use it that way. When it comes, by asking, you're preparing yourself when it comes to say thank you. And when you say thank you, you are prepared to say, I asked for it as a means to serve Him, so when I get it, I'm going to use it to serve Him. And God definitely wants to reinforce that type of asking, because that type of asking is self-preparation to serve Him in the appropriate fashion. This idea helped me understand a statement in the Talmud which bothered me for years. Talmud says, why were great righteous people barren? Because God desires the prayers of the righteous. Now, when I first heard that, I tried that on for size. Okay, if you've had any experience with infertility, I don't wish it on anybody. Not yourself, but if you've heard them, parents, friends who have suffered from infertility, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's physically demeaning and all sorts of invasive tests, and it's psychologically devastating for the couple, and psychologically devastating for each of the people in the couple. It's a terrible condition. I'm thinking, God makes righteous people infertile because He desires their prayers, their moaning, their groaning, their sighing, their tears. That's what He wants. I couldn't make that fit. But when I arrived at the idea that I gave you a few minutes ago, then I thought, wait a minute. If the prayer is preparation for using it the way it should be used, and we're talking about the infertility of the great, the pious, the righteous, not the average person, then maybe that's the idea. God wants their prayers because their prayers will indeed prepare them to use the children appropriately, deal with them appropriately, and He wants them to be prepared. Then I began to understand how there could be a positive element. At any rate, I think this is something that people can strive for, to focus one's identity on serving God. And if one does that, then when you ask for something, you're going to be asking for means to serve Him. Now, this idea has many connections to other ideas and statements in the literature. I want to trace out some of them for you to show you how rich this idea is. In the morning and evening prayers, we say the Shema, and then we go into the prayer. And the law is no interruptions. You say the Shema with its various associated blessings, and you go straight into the silent prayer. That's not obvious. It's not obvious why that should be. After all, the Shema goes back to Moses, 3,300 years ago. Organized everyday prayer started 1,000 years after that. The Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the beginning of the Second Temple. 1,000 years went by when Shema was being practiced, and there was no organized prayer, no institutional prayer. So they're really very separate institutions. Now along come the rabbis and say, look, we want you to pray 3 times a day, 4 times on Shabbos, 6 times in Yom Kippur, and so on and so on. We got a whole bunch of prayers. And we want the prayers to be connected to the Shema with no break. That needs an explanation. There's no obvious connection between the two of them. Given what I told you, you have an obvious connection. One of the elements of Shema is accepting upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Kabbalah Somachu Shamayim. That means you are defining yourself as a servant of God. That's the perfect preparation for prayer. You accept that upon yourself, and without a break, you go into prayer, where you're going to make petitions as a servant of God. That being the case, you're going to be able to ask for the things that you need as a means to serve Him, because that's your identity at that moment in time. So with that concept, you can understand why the rabbis put the two together. I wouldn't say it's the only reason, but it's definitely a reason. Okay? Now, a great deal has been made out of the connection between the prayers and the sacrifices. There is an idea which is very widespread, which is incorrect, and that is that the prayers were invented to replace the lost sacrifices with the destruction of the temple. That is incorrect. For one thing, the institution of prayer that we have was made at the beginning of the Second Temple and existed side by side with sacrifices for 420 years. Certainly not there just to make up for the lost sacrifices. Number two, we have references that link prayer to the temple long before it was destroyed. If you look in the book of Kings, first book of Kings, chapters 6, 7, 8, if I remember correctly, Solomon builds the temple. When he finishes building it, he gives a dedication, a long, long dedication. And in that dedication, he mentions one activity in the temple only, and that activity is prayer. Sacrifices aren't mentioned. If all you had was Solomon's dedication, you wouldn't know that there are sacrifices. It's unbelievable. You associate the temple with sacrifices, and you look at the introduction, it's unbelievable, but that's the way it is. Isaiah, the famous verse in Isaiah, the reason it's famous is because it was made into a popular song and people sing it. The verse in Isaiah says this: I will bring them into my holy mountain and cause them to rejoice in my house of prayer. Their sacrifices will be pleasing upon the altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The reader, I think, at this point is gasping for breath. Let's try that again. Bring them into my house of prayer. So that's what it is, house of prayer. Their offerings will be pleasing upon the altar. Oh, so there are sacrifices there. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all peoples. So what is it? Beginning and the end is a house of prayer. In the middle, it describes sacrifices being offered in the house of prayer. So what is it and what's going on? Obviously, there's an intimate connection between prayer and sacrifices. That can't be denied. Now, when the Talmud describes the institution of daily prayers with times and numbers, it says the prayers were instituted corresponding to the sacrifices. Tfilos kineged korbanos tiknum. They were instituted to correspond to the sacrifices. Not in place of the sacrifices, which is written elsewhere, but in the Talmud it's written correspond, kineged. So, with the verses in King Solomon and with the verse in Isaiah, the rabbis are carrying that out, that there's some kind of compound institution here, that prayers and sacrifices should integrate and correspond to one another. Okay, having said all of that, I think we face a puzzle. Let's talk about, in very simple terms, very simple global terms, what is the direction of flow for each? What is the direction of flow for prayer? And what is the direction of flow for sacrifices? Well, if the heart of prayer is, as we said, petition, the subject of petition is God giving to me. And sacrifices, whatever else they are, the giant literature on sacrifice, whatever they are, I take my animal and I bring it to the temple and I place it there before God. So on the surface anyway, the flow is from me to God. So you have two performances: prayer in which the flow is from God to me, sacrifices in which the flow is from me to God, and they're supposed to be integrated into one institution. How does that fit? And how do they bond to one another? Given what I told you 7 minutes ago, the answer is pretty clear. If I come to God to ask for means by which to serve Him, what is the real direction of flow? I'll give you two examples. There's an infantryman in battle. He's out there shooting bullets at the enemy, and he's running short of bullets. So he radios back to the camp and says, "Send bullets!" And they say, "Copter on the way, be there in 12 minutes. Okay, I got 1,000 rounds left. That'll last 12 minutes. Good. 12 minutes later, the copter comes over. There's a drop right next to him, a big case of bullets. He said, "I've got 15,000 bullets. Thanks, guys." And he starts shooting into the enemy. What's the flow here? Well, he got 15,000 bullets, so now he has more bullets. Yeah, but he's shooting bullets at the enemy in order to win the war. Isn't the real flow from the soldier to the army, to the country? He's doing something to benefit the army and the country. Yeah, they gave him bullets, but the whole point of the bullets is to get more good out of his battle, more good out of his fighting. So the real flow here is from the soldier to the army to the country. Similarly, you're working for IBM. Your job is to create 3D simulations of the wind flow over the surfaces of various designed wings. And you're working with an old Intel chip. And you say to your supervisor, "You know, I'm doing this. The machine crashes 2 or 3 times a day. Give me a new chip. It's a very complicated simulation. Give me a new chip. I guarantee you'll get much better simulations much faster." So his supervisor says, "I'll take it up with the higher-ups." He comes back in 2 weeks and said, "You got it." They think you're good. They think that it's worthwhile. And you'll have a new Intel chip. Now, again, what's the real flow here? Well, he's getting an Intel chip that he didn't have before. But they're getting much better simulations. Much faster. So the real flow here is from the worker to IBM. Not from IBM to the worker. All IBM is doing is investing in his better work. So when we come before God and we say, please give me X, what we're really saying is, please give me X so that you'll get more out of my service. The real direction of flow is from me to God, not from God to me. Which means now the direction of flow in prayers and in sacrifices is the same direction of flow. And then I think you can see how they can be integrated in a very simple, natural way. The message here is this. How do sacrifices work? It's July 16th. I sleep in until noon. Am I represented in the sacrifices in the temple? You bet I'm represented. Because in the spring, when they had the once-a-year tax, I paid my half shekel. I'm represented in the tax pool. And when they offer the sacrifice on July 16th, my name is associated with it. I can sleep till noon. The Kohanim are taking care of it, and it's in my name as well. The rabbis at the beginning of the Second Temple said, that's not good enough. It's not good enough to pay your dues once a year and be represented by your money. We want the act of national sacrifice to God to be participated in by all Jews. And the way you do that is by praying at the time when the sacrifice is offered, so it becomes a national participation in national sacrifice. That's the idea of linking prayer and sacrifices. And again, it's carried by our understanding that the petition is really a petition for means by which to serve him, so the direction of flow is from us to him. Okay? The second thing which we've been able to describe. Okay. Now I'll tell you something from the Talmud and Tractate Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says there are 4 times of judgment during the year. On Pesach, God judges the grains. At the beginning of the grain harvest, God judges the grains. On Shavuos, God judges the fruits of the trees of the year. On Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment for all people, God judges all people. And on Sukkot, God judges water because it's the beginning of the rainy season in the land of Israel. That's what it says in the Mishnah. Now this Mishnah is a précis, it's a kind of summarized version of a much longer statement that Rabbi Akiva made, and the Talmud preserves Rabbi Akiva's statement. And this is what Rabbi Akiva said. On Pesach, there's a unique once-a-year offering called the Omer. It's an offering of barley. Second day of Pesach. Why is that, said Rabbi Akiva? Why is there this once-a-year barley offering? Answer, because God is judging the grains of the year on Pesach. So God said, bring before me in the temple a sample of grains so that the grains of the year will be blessed. And why is there a once-a-year offering called the Shtei HaLechem on Shavuos? Because this is the time when the fruits of the trees are being judged. Bring before me the Shtei HaLechem so there'll be a blessing on the fruits of the year. And why is there a once a year, or 6 days a year, 7 days a year, or 3 days a year, depending on how much gears you have, offering of water on the altar on Sukkot, water libations? Because the waters of the year are being judged, and therefore bring before me an offering of water, so there'll be a blessing on the waters of the year. And Rabbi Akiva said, on Rosh Hashanah, pray. Pray. Now let's analyze Rabbi Akiva's statement. Rabbi Akiva seems to be following a formula. In the first 3 cases, he's following a formula. And my question to you will be, is he following the formula in the 4th case or not? Let's state the formula, show you how it works, and then we'll come to the 4th case and see whether it is being followed or not. The formula seems to be this. When category X is being judged, bring before me a sample of category X so that there will be a blessing on category X. Whether it's grains, or whether it's the fruit of the trees, sort of, or whether it's water, whenever it's being judged, whatever is being judged, bring a sample of it as an offering, so there'll be a blessing on X. And now, in Rosh Hashanah, he says, pray. If we followed the formula, what would it mean? Well, what's being judged on Rosh Hashanah? We are. So if I'm going to bring a sample of we, Sample of we is people? To be an offering? Are we talking about human sacrifice? What are we talking about? A sample of we as an offering in the temple? Now, Rabbi Akiva said, pray. Is he following the formula or breaking the formula?
He's following the
He's
formula.
following the formula. Because in prayer, you're offering yourself to God. That's what you're doing. You're saying in prayer, I belong to you. I'm your servant. I'm only here to serve you. I'm offering myself to God. So it is following the formula. People are being judged. You're offering yourself to God so as to be able to receive a blessing from the judgment that God has. So you see another thing. Once you understand petition the way I'm suggesting, then you can understand that as well. Okay? We together so far? Okay. But now there are a couple of difficulties that have to be faced. So, I'm asking for things as means to be able to serve God. Well, here I am again. Dear God, please give me the 2014 Porsche. And the angel stops and says, hey, what do you want that for? And I think, let's see. Means to serve God. Tell you, here's why I want it. Because on rainy days in Jerusalem, when I drive past the bus stop and I see yeshiva bachrim there, yeshiva students who need to go to the yeshiva, and they're in the cold and the rain, I'll stop and I'll pick them up, and they can sit on the leather seats, and they can enjoy the climate control and quadraphonic sound playing Mordechai and David, and we could really take them to the yeshiva in style. That's why I want the 2014 Porsche. Well, you can probably detect a certain element of self-deception here. What I really want to do is go roaring around the Galil or something. Right? Yeshiva students, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. How do I know that what I'm saying is right? How do I know that what I'm saying is accurate? Doesn't this call for some profound self-understanding, self-analysis? When I thought of this problem, I was reminded of something that Rav Hirsch writes, which bothered me for many years also. And now I began to see what it means, but it doesn't solve the problem. It just reinforces the problem. Rav Hirsch says that the verb in Hebrew to pray is lehispalel. Lehispalel is a grammatical form in Hebrew which is reflexive. Literally, it means it's something you do to yourself. Okay, now, says Rav Hirsch, palal, the root, means to judge. So, said Rav Hirsch, the verb lehispalel means to judge yourself. That's what he said. And I said, oh, why is that? Judge yourself? What has prayer got to do with judging yourself? And for many years, I didn't have a clue. But when I came across the idea of preparing yourself to serve God, and it occurred to me that there's an element of self-deception online here, ready to crawl into your request, then I thought to myself, wow, Rav Hirsch is right on the money. I wouldn't say this exhausts everything that he meant, but it definitely is an application of his idea that if I'm going to ask only for the things that will enable me to serve God best, that's going to require some self-analysis. But now, what reason do I have to think that it's accurate? And maybe at this point one might think, why should I go out on a limb here? Why should I specify what I need? Wouldn't it be enough to say to God, look, you know what I need. You know what, if I get it, will really help me serve you. Please give me whatever that is. Why should I go out on a limb and specify? But the truth is, we don't have that option because the categories are specified, and we are told that we are expected to put in our own personal needs under the categories. So we are supposed to specify our own personal individual needs. So what's the idea of it? I think the answer to that question goes back to where we started today. I'm asking because asking is a way to get it. I believe that, at least on some occasions, God will give it to me because I asked for it. So that asking it is a practical way to get it. Of course, it's not guaranteed. Neither is surgery guaranteed. That doesn't mean it's worthless. It's a way to get it. Now let's ask about the rest of my life. How do I decide what to go after in the rest of my life? How do I make that decision? Let's take a very concrete example. Imaginary example. Let's say I'm working 50 hours a week and earning $100,000 a year. Someone offers me a job, 40 hours a week for $80,000. Now he's offered it to me. So I've got to make a decision. Even ignoring him is the decision to keep my present job. So I got two choices. How do I make the choice? Well, if my goal is to serve God, I ask, with which job can I serve God better? If I had 10 extra free hours a week, what would I do with them? What will I lose in losing $20,000? What will I lose? What will I not be able to do? And make a bottom line assessment. In making that assessment, I'm assessing which job will enable me to serve God better. Now, of course, we don't make decisions like that on our own. We have advisors, but we're making the decision as to which is better for my service of God. Okay, then God put us in that situation. It wasn't always like that. At one time, for 1,000 years, prophets were very plentiful. Every Jew knew prophets. Had a question like that, he could go to a prophet and say, what's best? What does God want from me? But we haven't had prophecy in the last 2,500 years. So we're thrown back on our own resources to make that decision. Okay, now one step forward. Must I wait until the other job is offered? Couldn't I engage in periodic review, let's say every 6 months? Where am I holding? What am I doing? What are my options now? How have things changed in the last 6 months? And ask myself. So I'm working 50 hours for 100,000. Could there be another work setup that would be better for me? And come to the conclusion on my own that 40 hours for 80,000 would be better for me? If I can make the evaluation when it's offered, I can make the same evaluation when it isn't offered. Now let's suppose I make that evaluation. Then what will I do? Well, I'll put my name up on the internet bulletin boards, and I'll write to friends and relatives and acquaintances and say, I'm looking for a job of such and such a type. I will make efforts to get it. Now back to where we started from. Praying is an effort to get it. If God has put us in a circumstance where we have to make our own decisions as to what we should go after to serve Him better, and we have to follow out that decision with practical efforts, then God is sending us a signal. He wants us to make our own evaluation and use it to decide what to pray for also. Because praying for it is just another practical means whereby to get it. So then, fully conscious that my judgment is fallible, I could be making a mistake. And by the way, one of the things you pray for is good judgment, because you don't want to make a mistake. Fully conscious that I could be making a mistake, I make the decision, again, together with my advisors, and then I pray for it as I go after it with other practical means as well. So this question of how I can trust my judgment is answered. Are we together? And by the way, this idea of prayer as a practical means for achieving it was made very vivid by the Chazon Ish. He wrote the following. Imagine a situation like this. You are standing near a lake, and in the center of the lake there's a fellow in a boat, and the boat suddenly capsizes, and when he comes up, he's distant from the boat, and he yells, "Help! I can't swim!" And he's not wearing a life jacket. Now, what to do? So you look around, there's nobody else there. There are no boats there. There's no rope you could throw to him and drag him in. There's no piece of wood you could throw to him. It could float and help him stay above water. Now, the Chazon Ish follows out. And you say to yourself, well, then there's nothing I can do to help him. Nothing. So I'll pray for him. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. Because praying for him is helping him. That is helping him. So what you really should say is, there's nothing else I can do to help him, so I'll pray for him to help him. That's taking account of the idea that prayer is a practical way to achieve it. Now, of course, if you are an excellent lifesaver, you should not stand on the shore and pray. But on the other hand, as you swim out to get him, addressing a mental prayer to God is also appropriate. You should use all the means that are available to you. And prayer is one of the means that's available to you to make the world work. Okay? So that's That's the idea of prayer as a means and the way you solve the problem of how you know what means to use. I want to one more remark today. There's another section, but the next section really is a different dimension, and I don't think it'll be received. I don't think you'll be able to appreciate it. One more remark, and then, as always, tomorrow I'll review this. There's a lot of material. By the way, this is a chapter in a book that I wrote called The Informed Soul, of which there's a copy or two in the library. It's 8 of my shurim written up with footnotes and so forth. So, we said Rabbi Kiva told us when X is being judged, bring a sample before God of X, so there'll be a blessing on X. Ramban gives a fundamental idea which explains in some greater depth what Rabbi Kiva is saying. What is blessing? Says the Ramban, and here he's expressing the whole Kabbalistic tradition. I wouldn't say it's in contrast to others, but the Kabbalah talks about it a lot. Blessing is always an increase of something that already exists. Blessing is never ex nihilo, brand new. The source for this is a famous story in the Tanakh. A woman who is widowed and impoverished came to Elisha the prophet and said, I'm impoverished, I owe a lot of money, the creditors are going to foreclose, they're going to take my house, and they're going to take my children, which is illegal, but they're going to do it anyway, and I'm desperate, and I'm asking you for help. And she says, I want you to know who I am. My husband was Ovadia the prophet. They lived in the time of Achav and Izebel, known in English as Jezebel. That king and queen persecuted the prophets, persecuted the rabbis, tried to kill them out. They were dedicated to their idol worship. And Ovadia and his wife took 100 prophets, put 50 each in 2 caves, and provided food and drink and security for them. They single-handedly saved 100 prophets at risk of death for themselves. In particular, Ovadia borrowed a lot of money to do that. He died destitute. That's where the debts came from. The debts came from the fact that he borrowed money to save those prophets. Now his widow has no money, and the creditors are closing in, and she's going to lose everything. So she goes to Elisha the prophet and says, help! Elisha says, what do you have in the house? And she says, I have a little container of oil. Elisha says, go home, go to your neighbors, and borrow from them all the vessels you can find. Barrels and buckets and pots and anything that can hold liquid. Take all these vessels, bring them into the house, bring your children inside, close the door, and then pour from your little container of oil into those containers. That's what she does. She borrows all the vessels, brings them home, closes the door, and she starts pouring. And from her little container of oil, she's able to fill up all the vessels with oil. Goes back to Elisha and tells him what happened. He said, take the oil, sell it, pay off your creditors, and live from the rest of the oil. And she goes home and says, thank you very much. Fine. That settles her problem. Now, says the Ramban, notice what happened here. She was obviously a very great woman. She merited an open miracle. How did Elisha focus the miracle? On what she already had. She already had some oil. He asked her, what do you have in the house? And the miracle was to increase the oil that's already present. That's the way blessing works. I wouldn't say that all miracles are blessings, and in fact they all have to work that way. But says the Ramban, that's how blessing works. Blessing always increases what's already there. That's what the Ramban says. Now I want to just bring out what I think is the core of the idea. I think this is so obvious that the official sources don't have to mention it. Let's imagine the state of mind of that woman. She's standing in front of a barrel which holds 200 gallons, and she's got this little 2-ounce container of oil that she's going to pour. What does she think is going to happen to the oil? Does she think the 2 ounces will create a very thin film of oil at the bottom of the barrel? No. Because God's prophet told her to pour it out and fill the vessels, she trusts God, she trusts God's prophet, and when she pours it with the trust, with the belief that this little 2-ounce container is going to fill the whole barrel. Now, what is she doing? She's spiritualizing that oil. She's spiritualizing that oil. That's olive oil. You could put it on your salad and eat it with your cucumbers. No, she spiritualized it by using it together with her trust and belief in God. That's the pattern that Rabbi Akiva is talking about. Rabbi Akiva says, when something is being judged, take a sample, bring it before me in the temple as an offering, so that there'll be a blessing on that category. Quite right. Because when you take the sample and bring it before me, you're elevating it. You're spiritualizing it. It's the spiritualized sample that attracts the powers of blessing, which enable it to expand. And that's the message of prayer on Rosh Hashanah. When you stand before God on Rosh Hashanah in prayer, you're offering a sample of your time, a sample of your activity. These hours are wholly dedicated to you. They're doing nothing but responding to your time of judgment by offering myself before you as a sacrifice. That is spiritualizing yourself. And then you become a magnet for the powers of blessing to increase your powers and your resources also, just as blessing works across the board. So what you see here is that Rabbi Akiva's description is one that fits the model that we've given. It's precisely because in prayer you are offering yourself before God that you are elevating and spiritualizing yourself, and then can become a magnet for the powers of blessing, which can increase what you have.